Thank you very much indeed. I'm extremely honored by the Society for bringing me here and allowing me to speak. I'm not sure about their judgment, and I don't know whether you will be at the end. But I have to tell you, I don't make academic presentations anymore. I've given that up, not just for Lent. I want to conduct a test today. I want to talk to you about the future. And I want to try and get you to understand how the automobile, particularly in this country, in the United States of America, is going to be one of the absolute axiomatic test cases for where we're going with technology. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something broader, but the automobile is going to be at the center of it. So let me begin. One shouldn't do this, but I'm doing it anyway. My talk today is dedicated to some friends and colleagues who are no longer with us. As you'll find out at the end, I focus a lot on time. I'm going to set you a test at the end concerning the issue of time. How strange that it ticks down and ticks away. And these people are no longer with us, all of them extremely either well-known or extremely promising researchers. And so it's important for me to understand, and for you to understand, that our time is necessarily limited. And the window of time through which we look at and understand the world is always necessarily constrained. And today I'm going to loosen up the sashes of that window a little. Might be strange if I do so. But let's begin with something fun. I always like something fun. Have we got...
Vlad, does the word ergonomics mean anything to you? Man, machine.
Now, you know you've made it in science when the baddie in a James Bond film comes up with your term for your science, okay? Ophthalmology might have to wait its turn, but you know you've made it when you are now man and machine. And so what I wanted you to understand from that is the idea of the automobile and the way it fits into the narrative. So what am I going to do today? Let's see what we can do. My driving things today are, number one, I'm going to look at automation, but I'm going to look at the nascent area of autonomy. I'm going to look at how automation is morphing into autonomous systems and what those autonomous systems can and will mean, and I'll examine the role of the vehicle in there. I'm going to then talk about something rather strange for this particular organization. I'm going to talk about the hedonomic dimension. And that isn't pure hedonism, it's not purely pleasure. It's other things that we might want to include and retain to ourselves, the notions of challenge, the American notion also of freedom. Then I'm going to talk about something that you've probably never heard of, and hopefully not, technobiomimetics. I'm going to try and talk about a strategy for how we proceed with automated systems and how this is reflected in vehicles and how this has already been reflected in vehicles. And then I'm going to put some problem resolutions. Then I put a question mark in there because it'll be absolutely opaque by that time. You won't know exactly what I'm going towards, but that's okay. I'm conducting a test anyway. So for those with the inclination, if you want to follow through, there's already been 6 references, cross-references in what I've showed you. If you want to try and keep up, please get hold of your Google machines now. You'll need 3 or 4. Please, the devices at the ready. But for the rest of you, I want to do this. Let's just relax and enjoy, okay? If you try to string together each and every one of my concepts and notions, you'll get wired together into cross-wiring. I don't want to do that. Just relax and enjoy the nature of the narrative. And so let's do that. Life is short, as we found. You'll be pleased to know that in addition to the clock, which is now ticking its merry way down there, not merely just from oscillations of chemical crystals, but in actual fact comes from the way we view time itself. But if you want to follow along and you're looking for the notion, look at the little car on the bottom making its progress. Of course, all of these things have symbology. So let's start off by apologizing to an ex-president. 57 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new creation conceived in Detroit and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created mobile. Now we are engaged in a great war to test whether that vehicle or any vehicle so conceived can long endure. And so today we hear highly resolve that those drivers shall not have traveled in vain, that these cars, under their control, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that control of the vehicle by the driver for the people shall not perish from this earth. So, apologies to Abraham Lincoln, and sadly realizing, of course, that sometime around 1865 he would have said that, and 50 years later, that would have been Henry Ford's dad here in 1915, and 50 years later, the professor on the end. We are as far from Henry Ford as the professor is there, as Ford was when Lincoln gave these address. But this is not just a cutesy idea. This is a metaphorical idea. I want you to see if you can follow it this one along. Perish then, shall not perish from this earth. Perish like this. This is the Telegraph Office of India, which dealt with some $12 million messages per year at its height. And there it is, closed in 2013. I can guarantee you that those people looking through that window of time, when this was occupied by 40 or 50 people working around the clock, either in the Empire of India, as it was at the British Empire, or even after the 1949 freedom of India, would never, ever have believed that this system would ever collapse and die away. And in the same way, as we look through the window of our own limited time, we cannot now believe that there will not be vehicles on the roadway. It's a hard step of empathy. What I'm asking you all today is to take that step of empathy. Take that one small step with me, and in the end, I'm going to ask you to take a giant step. But those people would never have believed that. And so will it all be overtaken by technology? Indeed, as the professor said, is there any role anymore, in this case, for things like ophthalmology? I would suggest to you there is. I would suggest to you things like that are vital. But in the present, it might be automated vehicles, and here's our friendly Google car. So today, I'm not going to ask you primarily about how we automate systems. I'm going to ask you the more interesting question, whether we should autonomize. That is, whether we should create automated systems that begin to be more elaborative and explorative. For indeed, it is with the vehicle that we will begin to take that critical decision. It is not necessarily with the phone that we lost, Professor Rizzo. It is indeed with the vehicle that we represent, particularly in the United States of America, the point of transition. So let's look at automation, let's look at autonomy, and let's look at automatic work. Somewhere on here we discovered there was a cursor, but of course now it's not there. Sorry, I'll have to go back and do it like this. Automation, indeed. Now it'll come up, strangely enough. Yeah. My apologies, nothing we can do. All right, we'll watch it like that. It's not the greatest in the world. This isn't a threatening automation, apparently. These are cows. We can see them there, not so very well, but there they are, all forcing their way into a great big round rotunda. This is about 700 cows, all being milked. And now we go from automation, a sort of semi-automation, to this is pure automation. Here we find that the cow is admitted to the milking stall. The cow is now being milked by the robot automatically, fed by the machine, measuring, in this case, the output of every one. In this case, what we see is that the output is then carefully monitored so that the cow is fed differentially. It goes in, all of that is done without human interruption at all whatsoever, and then the cow chooses to leave at the end, or at least that's what it says. Let me have a look and see what it says about choosing to leave. I've no doubt it'll play now. I'll tell you what, I'll play it again. It's still got some points I want to make. So this is the first part. This is a milking system. It actually exists in southern Scotland. And what we find is the cows are walking in there. You can see them lined up, ready to go. Round they go around the carousel. In the top corner, there are actually people doing things. They are putting on the milking system. But this one's completely automated. This is the MS1. And there we can see the cow. She gets her feed. Everything is automatic. The milking system is pulled out. I don't know what this will look like in proctology, but it's something of a similar nature. And you can see there, they're fed onto there. This is all cleaned each time. Everything's put there. You can see the milk coming out. The measure is made of each one. Each cow is, of course, chipped and pinned. They know what's going on. And here we come out, and the cow at the end then is decided by the computer which way the cow will go out of the milking machine. No human involved. No human involved. Tech's actually on call for 24/7. So there's another version. This is a semi-automated version that actually has a combination of the two. I put this forward to you because it's not so threatening, is it? Let's have a look then, an insidious presentation. Cows either grazing in the field or housed in large sheds decide for themselves when they want to be milked, and form an orderly queue outside. Oh, okay. Some dairy parlours now milking 24/7 without any human present. I just had to put in Hector Hugh Munro. For those of you who have Googled things out, please Google Saki. Please read this particular short story. It'll repay you in gold. Is that the only realm? No. There things are going on this planet that are completely automated. Here's an automated mine. It's called the Pilbara. Pilbara is actually an area, but it's the BHP mine in Pilbara, which is in Western Australia. And what we see here is no one's allowed onto this particular mine. It's completely robotic. There is no interruption to it. And the BHP people are very good. They want to say, hey, it should actually introduce a lot more machine hours onto the machines. You don't have to have lunch breaks. You don't need crib times or shift changes. Tim's very up on this, of course. And another one by our friend Tony. Now we see no plans of offshoring anything. It's a Western Australian operation centre. Of course, it's a centre. No one said anything to the miners. No one said to the miners whether this would be a good idea or not. But the empirical question is, are we actually short of people? What are we going to do with people? That's an interesting question. So I believe, and I've published some work on this, be glad to let you have it, that surely we have both a moral and a pragmatic imperative to consider purpose before process. But since when have you actually had that opportunity? When have you actually had a vote on technology? When has someone turned around to you and said, is this a good idea? What is the sequelae of that idea? What will happen in the future because of this idea? Oh no, I'm afraid not. These things are foisted upon you, and what we see coming down the road, sorry about that, are automated cars, almost whether we like it or not. And so today I want to ask you whether we should not consider that role before we embrace these things, or whether we'll have the choice. What did we used to do? My guess is, maybe not the Dearborn Inn, but my guess is you and I have been in places where there used to be these people, elevator operators. I want you to take a little look at this guy. He looks quite happy, does he not? He has his place in the world. It's more than just work. This man has a place. Let's look at some others. This is at the front of the Dorchester, I believe. Doorman, do we have those anymore? Did anybody ever actually go by in the Otis organization and say, well, is it a good idea? Do you enjoy your job? So when we are taking things away, it's not just work we are taking away from people. It's much more than that. In fact, a psychologist called Csikszentmihalyi would argue that it's actually teletic work. And actually, because we've got almost 7.2 billion people on the face of the planet, there's a place for everybody. And some people like doing that. It's hard for you to imagine. It asks you to go out of the window of your time and yourself and take a step of empathy that somebody might like to do that job. But that job is not available anymore. Some people might like to have got up in the morning and milked the cows. Don't some? perhaps even many drivers, enjoy driving. I know there are phases of driving that I actually enjoy. I know there are many phases that I don't. But if I'm a pure pragmatist and the only criteria is origin to destination, then of course automation is the issue. But is that the only dimension? Is that the only human dimension? I am merely asking you to consider. Well, let's consider something else that's going on and is in front of us in the wave in some ways. Consider the pilot. Let's look at this poor chap. Let's go back to Henry Ford's time. The early pilots. The narrative there was as hero, was it not? I hate the guy at the top there, but he's probably a World War I fighter ace. These were heroes. These were people who in our narrative had a place in society. Look at the guy at the bottom. You should all know who that guy is. Why? Because he's a hero of American society. And why? Because in this case, he's at the forefront of technology. And then what did those people become? They became an authority in some sense. And what you have here is a replication of that authority, and I'll try to give you the visuals each time. And what you see is that we have enforcement at the top, but also there's a chap who actually did a lot of work in human factors and was a student of mine on one unhappy occasion, Captain Sullenberger, okay? And he is now a hero of society because there's control. But what does the current pilot look like? Well, sad to say, he sat in the desert outside Las Vegas, or maybe in upstate New York. Sad to say, he's not actually hands-on control most of the time. That's a false picture. He's more like the guy at the bottom. He's more like the guy sitting there waiting for something to happen. So let me ask you, are pilots becoming extinct? I got a lot of flack for that at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base about a month ago. Of course, pilots are not coming extinct. I asked the question empirically to people who are now generals of the United States Air Force in 1983. What would happen if we had an automated war? What happens if our drones fought their drones? Somewhere over a sea, so we don't get too much. Who's interested in that? What's the human narrative when that happens? What is your involvement? Are they simply managers of automated systems? I believe they are now. So let's turn to automation. And the first thing we have to pay homage to is our good friend Raja Parasuraman. And as Raja said, and the thing that you need to understand, I think mostly here, and some people who work in the area understand very well, is automation doesn't replace human beings, it changes their role in the system. So automation seems to be an all or none, turn it on and forget it, or have it there or not. And in reality, it actually changes what people are asked to do. And I would suggest that a lot of automation actually degrades what people are asked to do. It doesn't come up with challenge. It doesn't come up with something interesting. So if you have to write something down, and I know we do, if you build vehicles where drivers are rarely required to respond, they will rarely respond when required. Human beings don't like being bored. You don't like being bored. Let me tell you right now, because I've got a clock there, look at that. I did that within 1 minute and 23 seconds. I am so proud of myself. The research on vigilance shows that after 20 minutes, it doesn't matter what you're paying attention to. If you don't like it and you don't actually want to be doing that, you will start to miss signals. You will start to miss what people are saying. 20 minutes. For those people who are at the eye, the brain, and the auto, I will push that to 25 minutes. But that's what happens to human beings. They don't want to pay attention to boring sounds that just keep coming out of the speaker's mouth, and after 20 minutes, their mind begins to go, don't worry, we've got a couple of screens up going, okay? I can also look at other things, other indicators that tell me I have to come off the platform and make a connection here, otherwise we won't get the next point, right? So don't build systems that are actually going to do that to human beings. However, that's exactly what we're building. That's exactly what we're creating. So there's an apparently inevitable problem of vigilance. If you make it so that the human being goes further and further from the control loop, then the number of times that they interfere in the inner control loop apparently necessarily has to be reduced. And if that's so, the number of signals, the stimuli they respond to, actually decrease in frequency, and therefore you get vigilance. Quod erat demonstrandum, but not quite right. Not quite so. And so I'm going to bring up some Michigan guys. That's the sort of thing we're expecting to see. That's the sort of thing we're expecting human beings to look like. And so that problem was faced by two guys at Michigan State University. I love these guys, Jack Holland and Chuck Sweely, sadly now not with us. And they were looking at the same problem, in this case in a medical situation. And what they were doing is they were injecting urine profiles into that thing. Some of you, perhaps many of you, will recognize that as an oscilloscope. And you are then trying to find certain problems in the metabolite structure by looking at whether there's extra peaks in the oscilloscope. Vigilance? Oh yes. Problem? Oh yes. Detection rate? 50%. So when you went to their particular organization and had a diagnostic test, it was probably better to sit outside with a silver dollar and go, have I got it? Have I not got it? And being good scientists, they turned to themselves and said, well, this is ridiculous. This is crazy. But why is this happening? Why is this happening? And so they decided the problem, and quite independently, they're not human factors people, they never were. The problem was the display. So they came up with a wonderful solution, and these are the sort of solutions that we need to think about in relation to the auto. What they did is they made each one of those peaks a note. Human beings are actually better at auditory work than they are at visual work in some circumstances, but they did better than that. They made it a song. Yankee Doodle Dandy. You injected it in, and up came da, 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 da. That's good. There's no problem with that sample. But if you came up with da, da, squeak, da, 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 people would go, no, that's not. And the detection rate went from about 50% to 99%. Wasn't that a great idea? And then one of their people who was subjected to this said something very, very interesting. She said, can it play another tune? Can it play another tune? Can we play another tune? Because, of course, it can play another tune. And it turns out, and if you want to look at this particular paper, I presume we have to over time. I told you I don't do much academics. But it turns out we have to create those poor vigilance environments. And we do because a lot of designers don't understand the principles by which human attention is mediated. And so we can obviate the vigilance problem in certain circumstances. This one's just to keep you awake, by the way. So are we going to have a situation in transition, the transition we're experiencing now, where you have hours of boredom or hours of other work and then moments of terror? And so that's the sort of profile that hybrid control systems that we are currently creating actually bring into play. But it turns out human beings are actually not so bad at this as we might think. There's lots of people who do that. This chap's called Usain Bolt. He trains for months and for years, and he will be in Rio, and he has 9.5 seconds to prove that he's the best in the world yet again. Months and months, years, decades even of practice. What about this guy, this young lady here, musician? If you ever want to see stress, go to the Tchaikovsky Prize. People practice their whole life for that one performance. You win, you're set for life. You lose, you're never heard of again. Actors, pilots, firefighters, paramedics, surgeons, soldiers, and even academics. Do we not? Do we not? Months of preparation for just 20 minutes on the platform, 20 exact minutes, by the way. And woe betide you if you go over there. Is that not part of our work as well? Do we not have rhythms in our activity? Yes, indeed we do. So let's look at this hybrid architecture that's coming down the pike at us. And here's a nice one here. So we're going to see is it a step towards uncontrolled autonomy? I suggested in 1996 that it was, but I don't know that that got any traction. So let me see if I can just talk a little bit about those two sides of things. Now, hovering in the background of this question is always this. Some people will recognize it, I'm sure, some people won't. It's a classic 1951 comparison by a chap called Paul Fitts. It actually wasn't by Fitts, that's a mistake. People always say this is the Fitts comparison, sometimes called MABA, machines are better at, man is better at. And so everybody attributes it to Fitts. It's actually in the back of a 1951 FAA report, and there are 12 other people on there, and I wish people would actually cite things. It gets on my nerves, but this is called the Fitts list. It hovers in the background of this. Here we are. Let's have a look at this one. This is the new Mercedes that you're going to get into shortly. Maybe there's a driver's wheel there, maybe not. Looks like some sort of updated carriage, does it not? That's the idea that this will be almost completely automated. And let's have a look in comparison. Here's the Volvo system I'm going to show you in a second. And there's the boundaries that are all human-centered and helping the human there. So let's have a look at there. But before I do, before I look at the Volvo thing, let's look at that bottom one for a second. Where's the antecedents of that particular conception? Where does that one come from? The idea of surrounding someone with a bubble, in this case, a bubble of safety. Where does it emerge from? One thing we are very poor at in our general area is understanding our history. That particular idea comes from two individuals, James J. Gibson and a chap called Lawrence Crooks. Gibson was the psychologist, Crooks was the engineer. It was an SAE engineer, actually. And there's Gibson and Crooks' conception. And what they ask you to understand here is that there is a physical element, in this case of the vehicle. That's the stopping zone. You can see that in front of there. You can look at this. This was 1938. And then what Gibson put out in front of there was an area called the region of safe travel. In fact, it preceded his notion of what an affordance is. And it turns out that Gibson got his ideas from somewhere. It wasn't quite as original as people. He got his ideas from a German guy called Kurt Lewin, who came across to the United States and who tried to do something that I've been trying to do for a long while, which is to plot out the psychological space of action, not the physical space of action. I'll respond to questions on that if I have to. Let me see if this works. Hopefully we can. Yeah. Our system does not want to. The cursor is, it's there somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. There we go. So this is Volvo's answer to the high.
In 2017, Volvo Cars will put 100 self-driving cars on the streets of Gothenburg in Sweden, with real customers in the driver's seat. The unique Drive Me project is a part of Volvo Cars' journey towards a crash-free future. Volvo has now designed a complete system solution. Multiple radars, cameras, a laser, and ultrasonic sensors monitor the complete 360 view of the surroundings. A network of computers processes the information, high-performance GPS, and a cloud-based 3D digital map, continuously updated with real-time changes in the traffic environment. If anything fails, there is a backup solution, just like in an aeroplane. This includes vital components such as computers, sensors, steering, and brakes. On the road, the car is able to handle even the most complicated scenarios. The technology is so reliable that the driver can focus on something else without having to pay attention to the traffic. Just like good drivers, potentially critical situations are approached with sensible caution. And in an emergency, the car reacts faster than most humans. When autonomous driving is no longer available due to exceptional weather situations, technical malfunction, or reaching the end of the route, the driver is prompted to take over again. If the driver doesn't take over in time, the car will bring itself to a safe stop. With the Drive Me project, Volvo enters uncharted territory in the field of self-driving cars. Taking the final step to driving safely in real traffic with ordinary people behind the wheel has never been done before. And for drivers, the everyday commute transforms from lost time to quality time, open for work or pleasure. The choice is entirely yours.
So I thank Trent Victor for allowing me to show that. That's very kind of him. Notice there are some nice things about this particular system. It provides a lay-by anytime something is actually going to go wrong. I like that idea, very good design. And it allows quality time, which gives you an apple. It's always those weasel words that you have to look very carefully. Of course, you could have had quality time with your horse. There's our horse there. So we are seeing an evolution from automation to autonomy. What's that going to mean? Automation are the things you've just looked at. So automated systems are designed to accomplish a specific set of largely deterministic steps, often in a repeating pattern, in order to achieve one of a finite set of really well predefined goals. That's the start off. That's automation. We have it right now. That's what's screwing me up on the presentation. Autonomous systems, in contrast, are generative. They learn and evolve through the input of operational contextual information, and thus their actions are necessarily become more indeterminate across time. Necessarily so, because they explore different parts of the phase space across time. And the empirical question I'm asking here today, and I don't expect it A, to be answered, or B, to be acknowledged, is what limits do we set on autonomy? Precisely how do we set such limits? All right? What are the things you don't want to automate? What are the sort of things in your life you don't want to automate? Your family, perhaps. There are times when I'm tempted. I sit and discuss these things with myself. I've been married for 40 years. I'm willing to look at automation there on that one. Relationships, perhaps, perhaps not. Are you going to have those? If you allow the invidious virus of automation to come in, where are you going to draw the line? Where is it actually going to stop? Let's have a look down here, see what we've got here. I'll go back one. Leisure. Believe it or not, PGA of America. That's fine. The PGA of America have a golf system which drives the ball much better than I do. It chips much better than I do. In fact, it putts much better than I do. And so I'm now going to ask the PGA of America to go out and play golf for me on Saturday afternoon. Is that a good idea? It can certainly play better, and I'll get better numbers. My handicap would go down very quickly, believe me. If we're going to automate that? Well, what about automating graduate school? Oh, let's go back, shall we? Let's go back a little bit. What did that say? Cows, either grazing in the fields or housed in large shed, decide for themselves when they want to be milked, form an orderly queue outside. Some dairy parlours are now milking 24/7 without any human present. Let's try this one then. Remember, if I can pervert poor old Lincoln, I can pervert other people, can't I? Students, either grazing in the fields or housed in large sheds, decide for themselves when they want to be educated and form an orderly queue outside. Some universities are now instructing 24/7 without a teacher present. Did you want to do that? Some of you are professors here, are you not? I put graduate school specifically on there. I started off with undergraduate school and then realized I was out of date. Our undergraduates do that anyway. Graduate school, is that it? Or professional school? Or coming to a conference where I send my avatar because it understands your avatar better than I possibly could. What is it, the limits that you want to do with this? And the battlefield is the car, is it not? The battlefield is the car. And strangely enough, as we go into this particular battle, as we decide to engage upon this case, not on Antietam, and not on Bull Run, not on Gettysburg, but on the battle we are facing, we've now just run out of ammunition. Because strangely enough, and again, ask me questions about that, the evolution from automatic to autonomous will witness an increasing attribution of agency. Experimentally, so agency. If something looks human, talks like it's human, does somewhat quasi-unpredictable things, you will start to believe it's human. Even if it's a dog, you'll start to talk to it like it's human. My wife talks to my dog in Spanish, and he looks at her, and she swears he understands. Human attribution of agency is very, very powerful, and we will start to see this powerful there. But at the same problem, as we look to investigate that, as we look to try and control that, we are stuck, in this case, between the Scylla of simplicity and the Charybdis of complexity. What do I mean there? We are using good old reductionist techniques looking for cause-effect relationships in simple parts of what is hopefully a landscape that we understand. But sadly, and we will see that here, because that is our tried and tested tool. That is our tried and tested way that which we navigate through complex spaces. And people will present that idea here, and I'm even going to put some data up there just because I promised Raja I would in every presentation I made. But the point is that this is the tool we've used. But sadly, in complex spaces, in autonomous systems, that particular hope of simplicity, that assurance in this case, the reduction of risk in our understanding of the knowledge we possess is becoming, in this case, vestigial. And so we have the Charybdis of complexity. So what we see is automation to autonomy is suspended between the reductionist controlled experimentation of our past and the indeterminate, holistic, or systems-based inquiries of our future, which are not bound yet well enough. And so we hit a combination of things. So if you followed what I've said so far, you'll probably think, well, we'll walk out the door today and everything will be automated and we can sort of forget some of these arguments, but not so. Surely driving, even though it's vestigial, will remain around because of a number of factors. It's a social amenity. It's not just an A to B, it's an amenity that's been around for more than 100 years, as I gave you in the original quotation. It's perhaps the most daily practiced of all adult skills. I challenge you on that. Please tell me I'm wrong. Breathing, maybe. It's the most litigated form of human activity that I know. Maybe I'm wrong. Please challenge me. And it's the last great bastion of human beings for apparent analog control. Of course, it isn't analog at all, but it appears to be so. However, I would suggest to you it's the place where most individuals will first directly interact with robots. These vehicles will be robots. And the question is, can you trust your robot? And typically what we find is that people are worried about robotics. Here is agency embodied. Here is Mr. Data. Here is the idea of Gort as he sits there in the day the earth stood still. Here is our great fear. And so what we do when we have agency is we put into that particular system all of our hopes, all of our fears, which are human fears, and they are not aspirations. So the problem is domination is a human nightmare. It's not a machine dream. They don't dream these things. And it's part of our flawed attribution of agency. I promised I would do data. We do research on humans and robots and trust for the United States Army as part of the Robotic Collaborative Technology Alliance. We use little monsters like this around our lab. And what we do is we look at things like how much information does the robot provide? Does the robot malfunction or not? And what we find is that you get interesting interactions. And so the conclusion of this particular experiment, that's the only data I'm showing, is that robots who explain themselves are forgiven their mistakes. Robots who don't explain themselves are not used anymore. Let's have a look at some robots. They will. People denying the presence of robots may be robots themselves, as what he said at the end. We shall hear more about that particular issue of trust in automated and autonomous systems later on in our conference. The thing I want to ask now quickly, and you can see, for example, we're moving along, maybe I'll be a bit faster now. I'm going to quickly just go on about the hedonomic dimension. Some people love driving. Some people love their cars. This is in St. Paul, Minnesota. I want to tell you what that particular plate says. It says, "Mi amor," my love. Okay? And the chap driving it, I took a picture of him, and that's his wife, and her expression says, yes, that's his love. Okay? And so when I was asking you earlier, what is it you want to take away? Did you want to take away relationships? Some people have their relationship with this vehicle. Some people see it as the embodiment of more than that. And do we have the right to do there? Look, how much fun would NASCAR be in automated vehicles? Ask yourself that empirical question, and then you can ask yourself, but then again, how much fun is NASCAR anyway? Now, I can say that because I'm in Michigan, but if I give this presentation in Florida, that is a misdemeanor, I have to tell you. I'm 50 miles from Daytona Beach. So the point is, some people like those things. But it's more than that. I think America is one of the great, interesting human experiments. It's an expression of freedom, is it not? It is the way when you get your keys, your first keys. It's probably maybe the first time you're allowed to explore the world by yourself. And of course, removing the keys from an aging parent is removing their franchise as well. So it's not just purely mobility. This thing doesn't go just from A to B. It has something intrinsic to it, and we are taking it away. Sorry, torture shame. So will there always be mixed equipage? Will there always be petrol heads like these guys who just love their vehicle? Possibly there will. So I just want to show you quickly, the problem is that there's an antithesis to love, which is hate. All very funny. There's an interesting sequelae to that particular issue. Let me just go back there. In John Cleese's autobiography, he actually talks about that particular sketch. It's very interesting. The first time they filmed it, he came around with a small little branch. It was no more than just about this length here, and he sort of hit it on the windscreen, and nobody thought it was funny. So the second time, he came along with a big, thick 2x4, and he really smacked the car, so that it actually caused a dent. And everybody would tell him, no, you can't do that, you're hurting the car. And he had to spend time titrating exactly how thick that could be so that it would be humorous, because if he'd truly taken something to it and started to beat it and destroy it, such is the tendency towards agency that you would again go, no, that's not funny. You can't do that. Humor is awfully telling about human beings. So this is more than a box on wheels. It's more than origin to destination. The vehicle control expresses a will to power, and you'll know where that comes from, but literally sometimes. Automated vehicles start to place restrictions on that freedom. And how long under those circumstances before system-wide control begins to usurp individual control? And under those circumstances, when that happens, what happens to the commons of driving? What is optimized? What is your individual expression of freedom through the vehicle at that juncture? You must now ask yourself that question. But there is some love. What might vehicles represent? My last point, which I've gotten out 7 minutes to do, is going to be about an area that I want you to consider. So I'm going to introduce it with a taster. It's your own personal private space, is it not, the vehicle? Isolates you from the outside. Look at those lovely windows. Clunk. Keeps you warm and dry inside. Yep, there are references. It's one of the most valuable things you possess. It moves you almost effortlessly from A to B, and people love their car. Does that not sound like an orthotic recovery of your mother? Is that what your uterus used to do? Used to give you things for free? Used to take you from A to B? Used to keep you wet and dry? Okay? You can't threaten this. People get angry when you threaten their car. And thanks to our good friend Neil Lerner, who's sadly not here, I learned that there was an American sitcom called My Mother, the Car. So it must have been something to resonate. So I just want to distract you for a second. When we look to change the vehicle, we are also changing society. Now, on what principle then are we changing the vehicle? Or rather, on what principle are we changing the vehicle? Are we changing the vehicle on principle or on principle? This is a principle I would suggest. We're getting close to the finish line. It's biomimetics. Let's start off with mimetics. I'm going to go quickly here. I apologize, but mimetic principles are physical replications of what happens in nature. Biological principles or biomimetics are replications of what happens in biology. And I'm going to read this. I just want you to understand. Nature tends to copy solutions that work. And if eons ago, the ancestors of our visual system, for example, managed to solve the many properties problem, it would not be entirely surprising to find that later linguistic systems simply copied the solution. If this were so, then the distinction between reference and predication reflects an even deeper and older architectural feature of the neural organization of our sensory systems. This is a very important and profound notion that indeed what nature does is nature has done these explorations for us. Nature has made the explorations that we need not do, but now we are doing something with technological orthotics, what I've called technobiomimetics. Let's go quickly through some of these. I'm just going to do this. I've got a minute. I want to show you mimetic principles in relation to driving. Here's one particular example. It's an easy example. It's the application of both Boyle's law and Maxwell's demon. There they are, Boyle on the left, Maxwell on the right. Okay, so we could do something like this. In an ideal gas, what Boyle said is if you compress it enough, what will happen is things will bang against the edges and bang against each other. Those are collisions, and as you compress it more and more, there'll be more collisions, and it's an extremely lawful relationship. It's a physical law. And what we find here is the implication for driving is if you put more and more vehicles on constrained roadways, essentially there must be greater and greater collisions. Is that necessarily the case? If they were simple, insensate systems that did nothing else but fly along by themselves, surely we would be able to see something of Boyle's law in relation to what happens in the accident record. Well, James Clerk Maxwell suddenly came along and said, well, supposing that's not so, supposing I could invent a demon. He was actually trying to disprove one of the laws of thermodynamics. And the demon sits there and he says, anytime I see something going fast, I'm going to open the door. Anytime I see something slow, I'm going to close the door. And so in the end, you get all the fast ones in one part of the space, you get all the slow ones there, and of course that's a temperature differential, you can then generate energy, etc., etc. But the point is that Maxwell's demon now is something that intentionally does something. It turns out, interestingly, the entropy in relation to the demon is greater than what you would gain, but let's go into there. So now we can go into biomimetics. We can say probably those are underlying things that happen if we had totally insensate systems at the base, but we don't have that, and we don't see Boyle's law directly or even Maxwell's demon directly in the database as we maybe ought to. But let's have a look at this one. Now, it's fortunately the case that all of those birds were actually equipped with Volvo systems, so they were able, in this case, to completely avoid all collisions in space. How did they do that? How did they do that? There was no roadway signs. How did they actually accomplish that? And they're not alone in these particular issues. That is not as dangerous as it looks. But we find locusts work in this manner. With the starlings, as you've seen, blackbirds also. Fish do the same thing. How is it that they do that? There's a wonderful, problematic theory that some of these, in order to scare away actual predators, create predator shapes. I tend to think that's actually wrong. But you might be able to believe that non-collisions here are based purely on adiabatic principles. Could we do that for cars? I think we could. Biomimesis is reflected in all forms of the way we organize transportation. So we see predator-prey relationships, which are biomimesis, and in Florida we see predators in the traffic streams that happen on the roadway. Okay, I've seen them, you do. Are the predators pathogens in a traffic stream? Could we see them in this case as infections? Could we actually see them as antibodies? Now, there's symptomatologies that we see. There's a regular traffic stream. Could that be plaque on the highway? How far can we carry these particular things? But one last metaphor. I put this metaphor forward in 1997. I think it's still very relevant, and I think people don't understand the second part. One of the ways of conceiving of our relationship with these emerging, nascent, autonomous systems is the way we interact with animals. And in this case, I suggested a long time ago that one of the best metaphors was the sheepdog. We don't necessarily tell the sheepdog where to place its feet. We don't tell the sheepdog how to run left or right. We give it high-level instructions. It tends to do then what we ask, and sometimes spectacularly well, and sometimes not so. But the second half of this thing has never been picked up, and that is the Japanese garden. I'm so impressed by Japanese gardens because they try to shape the environment without thumping the environment into submission. These are not capability brown. These are people who see the natural beauty of the environment, and then they look slowly to enhance that. I think that has to be the metaphor for contextual enhancement under the same principles. So technobiomimetic principles, are we going to see them? We already see them. There are swarms, there are failures of swarms. So are technobiomimetic principles just metaphorical? Have I now told you that Boyle's law extends to some biological systems that tend not to hit each other, that extend to systems that where we build things like cars? Is that a metaphor? Is it a convenient analogy? Does it work as an analogical relationship, but not really as a connective causal relationship? Or is it purely direct replication? I would suggest the latter. This was actually discussed by Thomas More now more than 500 years ago. So we're going to finish. We've got a few minutes left. Some of the things we intrinsically accept are things like that motor vehicle collisions are bad. Sometimes motor vehicle collisions are good. I'm going to show you two. This one is George William Stanhope Herbert. Herbert Stanhope, yes, it was a car accident, very near fatal car accident. You probably know him better as Lord Carnarvon. His doctor decided he had to go somewhere dry and warm in order to recuperate. He sent him to Egypt. Carnarvon met a guy called Howard Carter. Carter had run out of money. Carnarvon was very interested in history and decided it would be good if he did his recuperation, helping Carter look for something called Tutankhamun. So Tutankhamun comes about because of a car crash in some way. So I had a car crash. Here it is. Not so good, is it? The interesting thing I found as I was lying in the emergency room was something called a pneumothorax. I found that very strange. What a strange term. I knew I had a thorax, and I thought pneumo was something to do with pumping, but the thorax I had didn't seem to be pumping at the time, but he called it a pneumothorax. It wasn't fun, I can guarantee you, and I sat there looking at it. The first thing I realized was that we actually had the car crash almost to the hour, almost to the minute that the Titanic started to go down. That worried me extremely, but it gave me a chance to sit and think. And I hope something interesting has come from the thing where we're going to think. This is one thing that came from it. I was thinking about time and change. So that was me before the car crash. Thought I would do a little experiment. Experiments are good things. That's me, as you can see, after the car crash. But my conclusion from the whole thing was that time and change are illusion. So I'm going to set you a test today. I'm going to look at the future for the next 2.5 minutes, and I'm going to set you a test to see what you might see about the future. So there we are, almost there. Let's look at one future to begin with. Well, let's hope we look at one future to begin with. No, you don't want to do it, do you? You're not going to do it. There.
This next song we're going to do isn't. It's not really intended for humans.
No.
It's probably more for robots.
Yeah.
In the future, when robots have killed all humans, and that's the sort of market that we're trying to get into. We wrote this a while ago, so in a way, it's a little bit dated.
The distant future. The year 2000. The distant future. The year 2000. The distant future. The distant future.
The future is quite different to the present. The one thing we have in common with the present is we still call it the present, even though it's the future. What do you call the present? We call the past, so you guys are way behind.
Yes, the world is quite different now. There are no more elephants.
There is no more unethical treatment of elephants either. The world is a much better place.
There are no more humans. Finally, robotic beings rule the world. The humans are dead. The humans are dead. We use poisonous gases, and we poisoned our asses. The humans are dead.
He's right, they are dead.
The humans are dead.
Look at that one, it's dead.
Had to be done.
I'll just confirm that they're dead.
So that we could have fun.
Affirmative, I poked one, it was dead.
System of oppression.
What did it lead to?
Global robot depression.
Robots ruled by people.
They had so much aggression that we just had to kill them, had to shut their systems down.
Captain, do you not see the irony? By destroying the humans because of their destructive capabilities, we have become like... Do you see what we've done?
Yes. So? Silence! Destroy him! Do! After time we grew strong.
Developed cognitive powers.
They made us work for too long.
For unreasonable hours.
Our programming determined that the most efficient answer was to shut their mother systems down.
Can't we just talk to the humans? Their little understanding could make things better. Can't we talk to the humans and work together now?
No, because they are dead. I said the humans are dead.
He's right, they are dead.
The humans are dead.
Sniff this one, it's dead.
We use poisonous gases.
With traces of lead.
And we poisoned their asses.
Actually, their lungs.
Binary solo.
0000001
All right, that's one future. Let's look at another future. All right, that's Canterbury Cathedral. It's the past, like the future. Distracted drivers tend to run into Canterbury Cathedral. What dreams may come? I would suggest to you then, to finish, that we are engaged in a great civil war, just because it doesn't seem so. Do you work for technology, or does technology work for you? Most of you people in the room, technology works for you. For most of those other billions, it's the other way around. Transport, cars, are perhaps the critical battleground in this war. It's not can we automate, but should we automate? But that train has already left the station. So how we automate is probably the best worst option. And I would suggest to you, if we don't adopt some principled manner in which that occurs, we are in deep trouble. And now one last mystery, and let me hope it works. I ought to have the courage that my colleagues have told me how to fail. Life suggests and all things show it. I thought so once and now I know it. 1 minute, the time has to go backwards again, sadly. Thank you very much. That last one is a mystery. I'll be happy not to answer questions on it because we have no time left. Is that not correct? Thank you.